I'm Isaki Voelker, creator and author of It's Not What It Seems. Today's short horror story is going to be a little bit longer than normal, and I'm really excited to share it with you. I was inspired by my love of all things Pride and Prejudice-esque. Jane Austen is one of my favorite authors, and I kind of imagined that setting when I wrote this story. Don't forget to please share some of these videos with someone that you also know loves spooky and horror and all those good things. Thank you so much. Georgie Peorgie and the Witches. Georgie Peorgie, pudding and pie, kissed the girls and made them cry. When the boys came out to play, Georgie Peorgie ran away. Georgie's feet crunched along the dirt path he was following in his walking loafers. Little pebbles pushed into tan sand while the sun streamed through the clouds, warming them up. From the east came a refreshing breeze, which whisked Georgie's orange tassels of hair around. He swung his arms back and forth with confidence and a practiced smile, which over time he came to believe was genuine under his sparkling emerald eyes. Dressed in a dark academia style with rich brown newsboy hat, matching coat, navy plaid pants under a solid navy vest, and white button-up shirt. He looked to be in his early 20s with a slim fit figure. As Georgie strolled past tall metal fences with grand Edwardian homes in the distance, he began to whistle. Just before the roads split off into two, one path leading into town, the other carrying on, there was someone he was aiming to bump into. Crunch, crunch went his footsteps, and came out a long, slow whistle. Georgie was going to see a girl. He stopped and smirked. It wasn't very far now. Georgie knew he was going to woo the new girl to the area and then break her heart when he was done with his fun. He always did this, and he was very, very good at it. Georgie did not know, however, that there was something different about the new girl. He didn't catch on with his obtuse mind. Just around the corner there was a large, unclaimed patch of field. Most girls picked the wildflowers along the side of the road, but not who Georgie wanted to see. He gazed out into the field as he walked down the path. He slowed his pace, waiting. Then, there! Up popped a rosy-cheeked girl with strawberry ringlets. Her face was angelic, while her hands were muddied from the soil. In her fingers were roots and worms. "Hello again," Georgie called out with a wave. The girl turned to see him and smiled. "Why, hello indeed. What are you looking for today?" The girl stood up and put her handfuls into her white apron pockets and wiped the mud off at the bottom's edge. She took a few large steps in a very unladylike manner toward him. The skirt of a pale blue dress was tied up on one side, exposing her ruffled bloomers. Georgie smiled again as she stood too close, ignoring all social etiquette. To him, she was a free spirit, unlike any other girl he'd ever known. He wanted to tame her, this being who defied all laws and proprieties with such purity. "I was looking for worms for my garden today. You caught me again. I still don't know your name." She cocked her head to the side with curiosity. "George, but you may call me Georgie. What should I call you?" "Ophelia." "How about I call you Leah? Just me, though." He looked into her eyes, making her blush. She smiled and looked down. "Okay." Georgie knew his venom was already working. He would have her soon enough. I should probably be going now. I think I have enough for my new plants. I'm growing herbs now." "Oh, what kind?" He leaned forward with lowered eyes and gave a wholehearted smile. Ophelia took a step back and turned. "It's a secret. I have to go now, but we'll see each other again, I'm sure." "I'm headed to town," Georgie called after as she began to hurry away. "I'll bring something back for you." She didn't turn back around, but kept on running toward the trees in the distance until she was out of view. Georgie thought for a moment where she was running to, as there was nothing out past the trees but more trees. It was beautiful forest, but one he never explored. He laughed and coughed it up to her shyness. He turned and made his way down the path that led into more condensed civilization. The town wasn't as grand as others, but it had the essentials of living in the early 20th century. Women walked past stone shops with wooden signs. Their hats a mixture of both the new, smaller style and the older, large floral design. Queen Victoria passed away but a year ago, and fashion was only just on the edge of change. Georgie winked at the young ladies as he strolled by. He kept one eye on the path, so he'd make sure not to step into anything unsightly, and one eye on them. He felt dapper in his newly tailored clothes, and did his best to avoid soiling them. Georgie sniffed the air, and the scent of fresh bread baking in ovens lingered. Swirls of sugared berries and fruits wafted in the air. It was as tantalizing as always. He rounded a corner, passing lovely window boxes and thatched roofs. Georgie approached the door of his favorite bakery and grasped the handle. Before he could open it, the ting-ting of a bicycle approaching met his ears. The wheels then skidded to a stop in the dirt. He lowered his hand and plastered a fake smile on his face to hide his annoyance. "Georgie, how are you?" A soft voice called out delicately to him. It sounded almost broken with sadness. "I haven't heard from you since—" He turned around and faced Isabel, a dark-skinned lady with long curls pulled up tight into a bun. Her features were gentle but passionate, with large lips and sultry eyes. Hiding her beauty was impossible. Her long brown skirt wrapped up high around her waist. The white ruffled top was tucked in, with a long row of buttons up the arms. She looked at him with dark brown eyes under her hat after leaning her bike up against the wall of the bakery. "Since our tryst in the grove? Yes, I know. But, Isabel, you know we cannot be together." He put his hands on either side of her arms and smiled. Her lips parted and she frowned. "You mean you used me?" "Used you? Oh, Izzy, no. Our time was beautiful, and I wish we could be. But we must think of our futures." Isabel took a small step back, moving away from one of Georgie's hands. "You said I was the future you wanted. I was a virgin," she whispered to him while glancing round to see if anyone else too close. Georgie's eyes went dark with anger, and he pulled her away from the front of the bakery over to the alley, all while keeping a smile on his face. He gripped her firmly. "Do not pull that shit with me. You knew what you were doing. It's your fault for not waiting for someone with a ring. You know very well that our families cannot mix." Georgie composed himself and let go of Isabel's arm. "Father has already promised me to someone of good breeding. No, I was hoping to part on good terms. It's best we pretend this never happened." Isabel's eyes were wide in disbelief and the shock of betrayal. She watched as Georgie walked away without a glance back and entered the bakery with the ding of the bell on the door. Her eyes welled up with tears. "But I think I'm pregnant." Inside the bakery, Georgie ordered 2 tiny tarts to be wrapped and boxed up. He figured they should stay fresh enough until he saw Ophelia again, either on the way home or tomorrow. From the corner of his eye, he kept a watch on Isabel outside, who moved slowly in stunned silence before she struggled to get back on her bike and pedal off to her destination. Georgie breathed a sigh of relief that he wouldn't have to awkwardly come up with a reason to stay in the bakery until she left. He grabbed his box of sweets and headed to the bespoke tailor shop, where he was to check in with his tailor. He wanted to discuss ideas for a new suit, one that made him look a bit more powerful. Georgie walked proudly with his head held up high and a big smile. He waved and greeted people as they passed him and tipped their hats. He was the town's good boy and son of a wealthy landowner and businessman. Everyone gave him respect, and never were there any rumors around his name. He always was very careful about who he chose to play with. Daughters that came for the season and then left, women who were about to be wed to soldiers and stationed far away. Rarely did he fool around with someone who stayed in town and could tarnish his good name. Isabel was an exception, as no one would believe anything she said due to her lower rank. Georgie found out that the girls who worked as servants or handmaids were the easiest to manipulate when he was bored and no one knew was in town. Ding ding! The tiny bell in the tailor's rang as Georgie pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside onto carpet. Around him were mirrors, chairs surrounding a small table with a box of cigars, and longer tables where fabric was put out for display. Off to the side was a short podium where the one being measured would stand. Behind thick red curtains came the sound of foot-pedaled sewing machines and people talking. Georgie strolled over to the chairs, took a seat, and opened the cigar box. He set the cake box on the table and reached into his pocket for a cigar cutter. "Ah, Mr. Peorgie, please help yourself. I will be with you in one moment." The tailor was tall and lanky with dark trousers, a white buttoned shirt, and bands around his arms that held pins and thread. Georgie smiled and nodded. He cut the tip of his cigar and put it to his lips as he leaned over the flame of a small candle. Puff, puff, puff. He sputtered his breathing to get the cherry glowing. He looked up from over the flame towards the red curtains that hid the sewing room. The heat in the air caused the image to waver and blur, but someone was standing there, watching him. He sat up further and looked at a young woman with long brown hair and round glasses, full lips and full hips. She was partially hidden, but her eyes met his. He smiled and matched her gaze. He even waved, and then leaned back and crossed his legs. He put his hand out to move the box of cake ever so slightly, only motioning enough to draw her attention to the detail. The young woman gasped silently, and then looked as though she was about to burst into tears. She ripped off her glasses and spun around back into the space behind the curtain out of sight. Georgie puffed on his cigar as he was content with her reaction. The next day, Georgie was strolling along as usual, but today he had his starts. Ophelia wasn't in her field on the way home the previous day, but he was not surprised as she said she found what she needed. He really hoped she would be back today and that he hadn't wasted his money on a fruitless effort. Then there she was picking dandelions and blowing their seeds in the wind. Georgie waved and walked over to her so that she looked up through floating wishes at him. "I brought you a surprise just as I promised." He opened the lid to the box to reveal 2 small cakes as she waved, stood, and walked over. "I hope you don't mind, but I got one for myself as well. I was hoping to share them together." Ophelia blushed as she looked from the cakes to him and then to her hands. "I don't mind." Together they sat in the grass, eating and laughing at each other's stories. Georgie was very good at making girls feel safe around him. Even the most prim and proper ones would allow themselves to be alone with him, eventually persuaded to permit him to find his way under their skirt. He didn't take no for an answer, even if it meant he had to be patiently persistent. He learned that with enough bothersome persuading and coaxing, a girl would come around, even when she didn't want to. They parted ways after Georgie was finding it hard to keep his thoughts and intentions in his head. He knew that he would have her sooner than later. They had decided to meet again the next day, and the next, and the next. The two of them took long walks through fields of flowers or the garden she was bringing back to life. Picnics under trees on blankets near her small country home that she shared with her grandparents. Georgie even learned a few things about gardening to keep the conversation going and pretend that he cared more than he actually did. Within 2 weeks, he had stolen kisses and made her blush. Her slight words of protest were silenced by his pressure, both verbal and physical. Ophelia kept to herself mostly throughout life and found that she was falling quickly for this young, dashing man. From one town to the next, she was always perceived as the oddball, and people whispered behind her back. Rumors of witchcraft and spells and naked moonlit nights spread like fire in dry brush. She moved and moved until she learned to keep away from the towns and to herself, until now. One night, less than a month into their meeting, Georgie had Ophelia pushed up against a tree under the sky full of stars. Passionate kisses and moans led to him guiding her hand southward to undo his trousers. Moments later, he had finally had her on top of his jacket with skirt raised on the ground. His conquest was about to be complete. He loved virgins the best. So gullible, so pleasurable. And he could always do as he pleased because they wouldn't know any better. Blonde red hair glowed in the moonlight as he pulled her head back. She moaned like she was the one seducing him and smiled. Georgie was caught off guard and almost lost his rhythm. Ophelia was becoming wild and vigorous, kissing him deeply. Was she really a virgin, like she said? Georgie was in ecstasy and couldn't have cared less in the moment. He was so proud of himself for capturing something so ethereal. That was the only word he could conjure up as he walked home, shirt untucked and jacket in his arm. It was dark and he cared not who saw him. He was a man and could get away with anything. It was easy enough to just say that he had been drinking, if anyone dared to question him. The endorphins were almost overwhelming. He felt satisfied, but knew soon he would crave Ophelia even more than before. There was something about her now that was different from the girl he saw in the fields. This one was feral. That one was tame. His mind continued to think only of her as he climbed into his luxurious bed. He grabbed his cock as it began to grow hard again. Georgie could do nothing but think of her and relive that night before it had even ended. For another month or so, Georgie and Ophelia met in secret near the forest, by a small river, or anywhere else that provided them privacy. Once Georgie was so brazen as to sneak her into his own large home some distance from hers. It was an amazing night of sex, and his wild girl, as he called her, never let him down. He couldn't get enough of her, and she was content with the promise he made her, until 3 months later. "What do you mean we have to think of our futures?" Ophelia asked with a furrowed brow. "We agreed to keep things secret so that you had time to break up your engagement with the woman your father set you up with." She took a step forward in the grass outside of her home. They were in the shade of a large tree showing signs of the coming autumn. "Last month you unofficially proposed. Or do you suddenly not remember?" Georgie breathed out through his teeth with a large sigh. He'd done this numerous times before, and he had this act down to a T. After a far-off glance and small shake of his head, Georgie turned his eyes to Ophelia and spoke. "I'm sorry. I have tried time and time again to speak with Father about the arranged marriage, but he won't hear of it. He desperately wants me to take over the family business and make ties with the business that woman's family runs. He says it'll benefit the future of not just myself, but the whole town." Georgie clasped Ophelia's hands in his own and kissed them. "You know that even though I want to be selfish with you, I cannot say no to helping the town become something more." Ophelia snatched her hands out of his. Her face hardened with a cross mouth and fiery eyes. "You told me you hated that town, and you didn't want to run your father's business. You told me time and time again that you wanted a life away from society. Please try to understand. I care and I love you, but I also do care for the people in town. Perhaps you misunderstood my words, and for that I am sorry. But if my arranged marriage can make their lives even the slightest bit better through our family's business, then I must go through with it. You don't give two shits about anyone else but yourself. The people that run this town stink like rot, just as you do. I can smell it clearly now." Ophelia glared with intensity at him. Georgie was taken aback by hearing a lady speak in such a foul manner. "I beg your pardon? When have I ever? I wanted to believe you had changed, that you weren't still the playboy I was told about again and again, but alas, you do not understand the meaning of commitment or love, only lust. I gave you my body and soul, my time and my energy. You care not about the repercussions of your actions, the children you create. You are nothing but a two-faced liar." "Now hold on just one moment. I don't know who's been telling you such nonsense, but I am a respectable man from a respectable family. I have never fathered a child. You have been the only one I have ignored God for, I swear. I understand that you are upset about our parting, but for you to come up with such accusations is astonishing. I wanted us to part on good terms, but I see now that this must be our last meeting ever. Even more so since the rumors of you being a witch have begun to be whispered. I cannot be associated with you any longer." Georgie turned and began to walk away, but glanced back. "I wish you the best, Ophelia, and I hope you find a man who fulfills you as I have." One hot tear dropped down Ophelia's cheek. She quickly wiped it away and hardened her eyes as she noticed Georgie smirk. "So be it." The next day was bright, although cloudy. Multicolored leaves drifted slowly to the ground. Georgie loved hearing their crunch just underfoot as he stepped heavily in his leather boots. He just had them polished and could see a gleam of light dance across them as he stepped. They matched well with his new dark suit. It made him feel more powerful than ever. Soon he would be taking his place next to his father in the family business. A light, feminine voice rang out. Georgie stopped suddenly. He looked up from the leaves and looked around for the owner of such an adorable voice. There! He spotted a pale woman with long black hair and an emerald dress. She was dancing and spinning in front of the woods where Ophelia would disappear into. Was this a cousin of Ophelia, perhaps? Georgie didn't care as his practiced smile spread across his face. "Hello there! Are you new? Visiting, perhaps?" His voice rang out loud and clear across the land. The woman eyed him up and down, then bit her lip. She held out her hand and motioned with her fingers for him to follow her, flirtatiously beckoning him. She walked slowly backwards toward the forest. Without as much as a backwards glance, Georgie hopped over the small fence and jogged in the direction of the woman. "Hey, give me a moment to catch up now." Georgie couldn't help but smile. She didn't look like a whore, not with her luxurious dress and shimmering hair. Georgie was at a loss for thought at who this brazen, seductive woman could be, if not someone from a brothel. He watched her disappear into the shadows and trees. Her laughter rang out as if to guide him. Georgie felt entranced. It was almost as though his actions were automatic. His strong, muscular legs pushed him across the field until he was finally among the trees, with caution the farthest thing from his mind. Until he stopped. He blinked. Georgie's ears searched for the sound of the woman's laughter, but all was silent. The birds sitting in the trees did not sing. The deer in the distance stood still and watched him without running away. He chuckled nervously and looked around. Far away through the trees was the glimmer of autumn's light shining down onto the field. When did he get so far in? Hello? Georgie called out, laughing at his own confusion. "Where'd you go?" Snap, crack! Georgie heard the sound of fallen branches break and spun around. From the corner of his eye, he started to see someone. Don't! Then all turned black. Georgie moaned. His head throbbed with pain. He blinked a few times as he lifted his head up from his chest. What? Although still groggy, Georgie quickly realized his arms and legs were bound to a thick wooden stake. Reality snapped back quickly as he became aware of his surroundings. What's going on? In front of him, in a circular clearing far from the trees and under the light of a waning moon, stood the woman in emerald with black hair. In her hand, she held a leather-bound book. A small, newly built fire blazed before her. To her left was the girl from the tailor's. To her right was Isabel. From there on out stood 3 other women who lived in town that Georgie had had fun with. With a motion of her hand in front of her face, the mysterious woman relinquished her disguise and transformed back into herself, Ophelia. Her face was grave. Ophelia! What's going on? Isabel? Sarah? Elizabeth? Mary? Sophia? What is this all about? Georgie began to sweat as a cool breeze passed through the trees, rustling their leaves until they drifted slowly to the ground to wither and decay. Shall we begin? Ophelia asked the woman standing at her side. Her voice was dark and cut sharply through the air. She motioned for them to spread out around the circle, around Georgie. Is this about my joke? Saying you were a witch? Georgie's heart began to race. He struggled to move, trying to find a loose part in the ropes, but there was none. I take it back. I don't believe you are. I saw nothing that resembled magic. It must have been a trick of the light. All 6 women were now evenly spaced apart in a circle, with Georgie tied at the stake in the center. A barrier of salt to protect us from which we summon. Ophelia bent low to the ground and poured out salt from a pouch. She was creating a large circle of salt between Georgie and the women. May they only consume what we offer to them, and nothing more. Summon? Oh God, you're going to light me on fire? Offer me to the devil? Georgie's mind raced with obscure ideas about witches. There was no kindling near his feet, but that could quickly change. Please don't light me on fire. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to all of you. Sorry is not good enough, Isabel yelled from her position to his right. I was pregnant with our child. Ophelia is the one who helped me out of that situation, not you. What? I don't see a child. You don't look pregnant. As I said, Isabel picked up a black robe from off the ground and wrapped it around her, pulling the hood up above her head. Ophelia is the one who helped me get rid of the baby, not you. And I'm not the only one. You killed my child? Georgie screamed out as he tried a new approach. "So you are a witch! How could you kill a baby? What did you do? Rip it out of her?" "No, you whore!" All the women now wore black robes with hoods pulled up. The woman with tan skin and violet eyes spoke with anger. "Ophelia is a master with plants. She aided us so that we felt nothing more than our usually monthly pains. But we shall never forget the life that we passed." Ophelia returned to her spot, standing in front of Georgie, finishing the circle by going around the fire, making sure to keep it inside the circle with her prior lover. "You promised to marry me," a woman from behind Georgie called out. "And me! And me!" "Silence, my sisters," Ophelia finally spoke. All around the circle quieted down. "George promised to marry me as well. He promised all of us that we were the only one, his only desire. And naively we all believed him, myself included." Ophelia turned the pages in her book until she found the one she was looking for. "But I shall be the last one he ever fools, ever uses, ever breaks. I know the stories, your stories." Ophelia smiled softly, sadly, as she looked around the circle. "We always want to give them one last chance at making things right, though, don't we?" The women all nodded in agreement, knowing their hearts were once soft. "Now we know better, because we met someone who threw us into the thorn bush as soon as he was done with us." Ophelia turned to look Georgie dead in the eye. "I was your last chance at change. I was everything you asked for and more. Yet you discarded me just as you did every other woman who ever loved you." "Hey, now I didn't use any of you on purpose. I was just figuring out what I wanted. I still don't know what I want. But I'll marry one of you if you let me go. I promise." Georgie looked from side to side as far as his restrictions would permit him. "And I did make everyone fall in love with me. The women who came to town for only a brief time knew it was just a tryst. I promise that I never meant to hurt any of you." Ophelia pulled out a bag from the sleeve of her cloak. She slowly pulled the string, keeping it shut, then reached in with long fingers and pulled a handful of dried herbs and small bones. She cast it into the fire, keeping her feet on the outside of the salt circle. The flames burst higher and sparked, then settled down to burn a deep, deep, unnatural red. The air began to fill with smoke that wound its way towards Georgie. The women around the circle raised their arms high into the air. "What was that? What did you just throw into the flames?" Georgie asked. His voice was growing hoarse from the yelling. He coughed several times on the smoke. His eyes watered, making the vision blurry. "Hey, here's an idea. You are all getting along well. Why don't we all live together? Then I can be with all of you, and there won't be any hard feelings." Ophelia looked down at her book and began to read. "Abatu, we humbly invoke thy presence before us, maiden soiled with dark lust for destruction. Ardalail, we humbly invoke thy presence before us, maiden scorned by this man with lies and selfishness. Balban, we humbly invoke thy presence before us, maidens who offer you one filled with delusions. Clarius, we humbly invoke thy presence before us and welcome your fire." Ophelia smiled and looked through the flames into the eyes of Georgie. The fire groaned and whispered 1,000 voices. It heaved and sighed as 4 demons emerged from the deep red flames. One crawled out on all 4s, 2 stepped out on clawed feet. The last one looked like a naked woman with skin like lava. She stepped forward, dripping fire from her hands. Georgie screamed with all his might, pulled at the ropes that were bound too tight. This was worse than being burnt alive, surely. Panic flooded through him as he pissed through his new suit down his leg. He looked down at the demon who crawled and scurried over to him. It reached out and touched his foot. Georgie screamed again as searing pain raced up his leg. He felt as though he was on fire, but there were no flames. Then the demon bit down hard into his leg, making him scream again. The female demon walked over in a seductive manner, pushing her plump breasts up against his chest. They slowly simmered their way through the cloth between her and Georgie's skin. Then she stuck out her long, pointed tongue and slowly charred his flesh as she licked his cheek. Georgie screamed in pain and incomprehensible fear. The succubus laughed in the most vile way at his reaction. The tallest of the 4 demons stood muscular, naked, and brazenly well endowed with large horns. From his hands he whipped a metal chain that wrapped around Georgie and the stake and pulled hard. Both Georgie and the stakes were ripped out of the ground and fell hard into the dirt. The demon then pulled Georgie towards the fire with even strokes. The last demon laughed and laughed at everything curled up, rolling on his back. Then he quickly jumped up and rushed away from the fire, beelining towards Ophelia. He came to an abrupt halt just inches away from her face. He put out a clawed hand as if to reach out for her, but the salt barrier created an invisible wall that he could not permeate. "Take what you have been offered and go," Ophelia spoke without fear. "We shall go," the vixen replied. She stepped back into the flames and vanished. First to follow her into the fire was the crawling demon. The laughing demon smiled a wicked, pointy-toothy grin at Ophelia before it too ran back into the fire and leaped into the flames. The tallest demon continued to pull a screaming Georgie still attached to the stake toward the fire. It stepped into the flames once Georgie was very close and disappeared. The chain continued to drag Georgie as he screamed, "Please, no!" He looked frantically at Ophelia, tears pouring down his face. "Help me! Please! I'll change! His words turned to screams as his feet entered the fire. His hazel eyes bulged, staring at Ophelia as they too vanished into the plane that demons came from. The fire snapped out, and all was silent once again. Okay, so maybe it wasn't the same time period, the same kind of structures as Jane Austen's stuff, but you know, I'm a fan of a lot of different things, so long as they got pretty dresses and cool stuff going on there. Like, I definitely have watched Bridgerton. Still need to finish the new season that got released, but all that stuff, I just eat all of that up. I absolutely love it. So, about Ophelia. Do you think that she knew about Georgie all along, or did she actually fall in love with him and then found things out later? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And as I said earlier, please don't forget to share this video with your fellow friends on your social medias, wherever, you know, it can gain traction. I would greatly appreciate that. Until next time, stay safe, because the people around you may not be as they seem. Bye! I'm recording this 2 days before July 4th, and July 4th is the Independence Day in the US, and I'm hearing fireworks go off in the background. Although earlier when one fired off during the daytime today, it was completely unexpected, and I actually kind of forgot about July 4th, and my immediate thought was actually about the bombs that were going off in Palestine. So this year, I think I'm going to see them very, very differently than normal. Especially because the country I'm in isn't making the best decisions right now for things. But, yep.